At the age of only 28, the crises, riots, uprisings, terrorist attacks, and wars weakened and divided this country, which is considered the poorest in the Middle East. Let's take a look back at its origins, the history of the Yemeni Republic. We begin in 1988 when Yemen was divided into two countries. In the south, the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen, with its capital in Aden, which was the only communist state in the Middle East, ruled by a single party and allied with the Soviet Union. Despite its large size, most of the country is covered by desert, and its population was 2.5 million citizens. In the north was the Yemen Arab Republic, an Islamic state with its capital in Sana'a. Its population numbered 7 million, and it was more prosperous. At the end of the Cold War, the Soviet Union weakened, leading to a decrease in financial aid to South Yemen. This drove the South to seek closer ties with its neighbor, paving the way for negotiations to unify the country. 2 years later, in 1990, the Republic of Yemen was born. The former president of North Yemen, Ali Abdullah Saleh, who had been in power for 11 years, assumed the presidency of the newly unified country, while the former president of South Yemen, Ali Salim al-Baid, became vice president. Sana'a became the capital, and the majority of the population were Muslims, with approximately 35% being Zaydi Shia and 65% Sunni. Shortly after independence, the country opposed the intervention in Iraq during the Gulf War, and in response, Western and Arab countries cut their financial support. At the same time, Saudi Arabia harassed many Yemeni workers on its territory. Faced with the country's financial difficulties and no visible progress, Vice President Ali al-Baid attempted to restore the independence of South Yemen. After a short civil war, the North asserted its sovereignty, and the position of vice president was given to the Minister of Defense, Abdirabu Mansour Hadi. In 1997, jihadist rebellion began with the emergence of al-Qaeda in Yemen, targeting government forces and the United States. The government launched attacks on the terrorist organization. In 2004, Zaydi Shiite tribes in the north complained of being marginalized, leading to a new rebellion. The rebels called themselves the Houthis, named after their leader, who was killed that same year by the army. This group ideologically opposes America, Judaism, and Zionism. In the south, anger continued over the unification of Yemen. In 2007, the Southern Movement Hirak, a separatist political group, emerged. It later participated in the 2011 revolution, inspired by the Arab Spring, with people taking to the streets demanding an end to corruption, a stronger economy, and lower unemployment rates. Saleh attempted to hold on to power, but was eventually replaced by his vice president, Hadi, who initiated discussions to restructure the government to make it more democratic. However, 2 years later, the proposed reforms proved ineffective, and the Houthis grew frustrated with their lack of political power in their region. They armed themselves and began the Yemeni civil war, this time with support from some parts of the population and forces loyal to former President Ali Saleh, who sought to return to power. Together, they stormed Sana'a, forcing Hadi to flee to Aden and later to Saudi Arabia. The Gulf Cooperation Council condemned what it called a coup, and in the regional conflict that ensued, Saudi Arabia accused Iran, which has a Shia majority, of militarily supporting the Houthi rebels. Saudi Arabia also did not want to see the Bab al-Mandab Strait, the fourth most important oil transit route in the world, fall into the hands of the rebels. Saudi Arabia then formed a coalition of 9 predominantly Sunni Muslim countries to restore Hadi to power. They received logistical and intelligence support from the United States. The coalition began bombing strategic sites while the United Nations imposed an arms embargo on the Houthis and their allies. In July, the coalition took control of Aden, where Hadi and his government had fled, and turned their efforts toward Taiz. Despite the coalition having better equipment, their lack of field experience caused periodic losses, preventing them from gaining the upper hand. When the coalition's military advance stalled, they resorted to airstrikes. Local civilians often became the victims, caught in crossfire. In October, the Haydn Hospital was bombed. The United Nations condemned the bombing and called for negotiations for a peace treaty, but these efforts failed. In addition to airstrikes, the coalition imposed a blockade on ports and airports controlled by the Houthis, allowing only relief shipments, which were insufficient for a population suffering from a humanitarian crisis. As a result, 2 million Yemenis were displaced internally. By the end of 2016, a cholera epidemic began spreading, affecting nearly 1 million people and causing over 2,200 deaths. The United Nations estimated that 7 million Yemenis, or about a quarter of the country's population, were facing starvation. In Sana'a, Saleh withdrew from his alliance with the Houthis, attempting to approach Saudi Arabia diplomatically. In response, he was killed by the Houthis a few days later. In Aden, Hadi faced tough times trying to maintain his authority and unite the population. The Southern Movement formed the Southern Transitional Council, a separatist group that took control of the city and the presidential palace. This group received support from the United Arab Emirates, which distanced itself from the coalition. The UAE shifted its focus from fighting the Houthis to targeting al-Qaeda and spreading its influence over the Yemeni island of Socotra, which it viewed as a strategic asset. In retaliation for ballistic missiles fired at Saudi Arabia, the coalition intensified airstrikes, especially in the north. Hadi's loyal forces attempted to regain control of the strategic port of Hodeidah to cut off the Houthis' access to the sea. In Aden, the Southern Transitional Council became stronger with UAE support, forcing the UAE to withdraw from Socotra after Saudi Arabia intervened. In eastern Yemen, after several U.S. drone strikes, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula exploited the chaos and tightened its grip on power. Other terrorist groups, including ISIS, joined the fight. The country remains completely fragmented, with the Yemeni people paying the highest price, with over 10,000 casualties in 4 years. According to the United Nations, the blockade on the country has led to the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. All of this happens while arms sales to Saudi Arabia and the UAE rise, resulting in enormous profits, with the United States, the United Kingdom, and France being the biggest beneficiaries.